This is Faye Fathering, Campaigns and Communications Manager for Endometriosis UK, and you are listening to the Academy's Developing Practice podcast.
Hello, and in this special episode for International Women's Day, myself, Alex Owen, academic developer, and Faye Forbes, Diversity and Equality Apprentice, sat down with Faye Fathering, Campaigns and Communication Manager at Endometriosis UK. We discussed the impact that endometriosis can have on women's lives and the work Endometriosis UK does to give women a voice and receive the care they need. We hope you enjoy. Faye, we're really pleased to be speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. So before we start, could you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you've arrived at the position you're in today?
Of course. So I've always worked in the charity sector. I head up campaigning and communications. So I originally trained as a journalist and then moved over to working in the charity sector. And I actually heard about endometriosis for the first time through one of my best friends. And I was just so shocked to hear of everything that she was going through. She said, that it took her 7 years to get diagnosed. And I was just so shocked and just really wanted to get involved and work for a charity that was pushing for changes to better support people.
Brilliant. So is that why you went into journalism originally, was to, obviously you like to get to know people, and then into the charity sector as well? Was it to help people? Was there a clear direction in terms of what you were planning on doing with your career?
Yeah, definitely. I think good journalism is all about people, and I think good charity work is always about people as well. And I have the privilege within my role of telling so many different people's experiences, with the media, in politics, so sharing their stories with MPs and politicians, and on social media, and really helping build a community through the amazing people that share their story.
Lovely. So what does a day in your life look like as a campaigns and communications manager? What kind of things are you involved in?
I mean, every day is slightly different, and we're a really small charity. So even though endometriosis affects 1.5 million women across the UK, we're actually really small. So we've only got 5 members of staff in our staff team. So some days it's, doing admin and supporting different teams as much as I can. And then other days, are really exciting and are really kind of paving the way for people with endometriosis. So, we've worked with the BBC. I did a huge project with the BBC in 2019 where we actually interviewed 10,000 people with the condition, which was a huge, huge project, and lobbying Parliament. So meeting with MPs, telling people stories, lobbying for change. So yeah, it's very, very varied, but a really great cause to be involved with.
Our podcast seeks to support colleagues working in or with HE to share their experiences and develop their practice, including how they support their co-workers and students. Many people are not aware that endometriosis is the second most common gynecological condition in the UK. Therefore, many of our colleagues working in HE could well be suffering with this condition. Could you please explain what endometriosis is and how many women suffer from it both in the UK and worldwide?
Of course. So endometriosis is where cells similar to those in the lining of the womb are found elsewhere in the body. So when you have a normal period, the blood obviously escapes the body. But when you've got endometriosis, this blood has nowhere to escape, which can lead to scar tissue and adhesions within the body. It tends to be within the pelvic cavity. So it tends to affect people's ovaries and areas within the pelvis. But one thing that a lot of people don't actually know about the condition is that it's not just a gynecological condition. It can affect other areas of the body too. So actually up to 10% of people with endometriosis have thoracic endometriosis, which is where it affects your lungs. So we're also told from up to 10% of those women that sometimes it can even lead to a collapsed lung. So it's a very varied condition that can affect a lot of different parts of people's bodies.
I couldn't get my head around the statistics. So I've never suffered from endometriosis. I don't know anyone who has. So Faye from the Academy, who's also on this call, we've had some really interesting discussions and she's educated me about this. So 1 in 10 women have endometriosis. How do I not know about this? Why is it such a taboo subject?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the terrifying things, actually, that this is 1 in 10 women and those assigned female at birth, which is around 1.5 million in the UK. And worldwide, that's around 176 million. So this is huge. This is not uncommon. But unfortunately, it's not uncommon that people haven't heard of it. So you're definitely not alone in having never heard of it. We did some polling quite recently, and 54% of the general public have never heard of endometriosis. And that rises to 64% of women between the age of 16 to 24. And I think this is for a variety of reasons. I think one of them is, like you say, it's a taboo. You know, I think still you mention periods, you mention women's issues, mental health issues, and people just squirm. People don't necessarily want to talk about it. And I think that's embedded from a young age. So we're really pleased that in England now, menstrual wellbeing is actually on the school curriculum. So we're hoping that this will kind of encourage that conversation from a young age, so that more people are talking about it, because there will be thousands of people, unfortunately, that have endometriosis but don't know, because I think society has normalised some of the symptoms. So one of the symptoms, for example, is painful periods. And I think, you know, there's such a thing embedded within women that you just think, oh, I'm just going to get on with it. You know, it's normal. This is what everyone's going through. Whereas actually it can be a symptom of a serious health condition. So I think I think they're the main issues, really.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because I suffer from endometriosis myself. And it's quite a funny story, actually, because I remember I was 14 when I first had my first period, and my mum was at work and my dad was in. One of my symptoms is I get really bad pains, bit more, but like up my bum. And I remember telling my dad, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then obviously I went to the toilet and there was blood there. So we went to my dad, and my dad just like panicked and was like, tell you what, just go and sit on the toilet till your mum's home, and like your mum can. And it was about, I think about 40 minutes until my mum got home, and I was waiting for her. And the pain I was in, and this is for my first ever period, like the pain was horrific. And I was thinking, what, like I even thought something's not right, but you get told that it's normal and every woman goes through it, and you've just got to get on with it. And I was thinking, I'd watch other women, like older women and family, and think, how do you do this every month? Because for me, it's crippling. Like I can't, am I just that weak? I can't cope with a normal period. Like, and in the end, obviously I had endometriosis, and it's definitely a taboo subject, because I remember like in school as well with teachers, if I was unwell because of my periods, it was treated as she's being dramatic, here she goes again. And it's definitely something that I find personally strange as well, because it's such a natural thing and people just don't want to talk about it.
So do we think that's going to change at all? So if I think back, I'm older than you both face, and we just didn't talk about that kind of thing, but I've got 2 teenage girls now, and I've made a massive point of just normalising the conversation around our bodies and around menstruation and our health. Do you think that's what it takes, is the next generation just normalising conversation around this?
I think so, and I think that is one of the biggest issues, is, you know, not enough people are normalising the conversation. And I do think that starts at school, and, you know, specifically within certain communities as well. So within some BAME communities as well, you know, periods are very much still a taboo, and therefore the safest and most controlled environment that this can be taught in is schools, because it can't be expected that every parent is comfortable talking to their child. And, you know, it's incredible that you are, and, you know, you're teaching your girls about this, but, you know, that isn't the same across the board, and therefore these conversations really do have to start at school, I think.
Brilliant. And that leads really nicely into my next question, because I believe Endometriosis UK works to highlight the condition in terms of supporting our colleagues to further understand the impact of endometriosis. Could you just highlight some of the work that you're doing at Endometriosis UK to raise awareness and help people who suffer from it? And maybe just tell us about some of the resources that you've developed to help us with those conversations.
Yeah, of course. So primarily we are a support-based charity. So we have support groups across the country who are all run by a team of incredible volunteers who all have lived experience of endometriosis. We actually have a group in Merseyside. So anyone listening that needs support can go along to our Merseyside support group. They are meeting online at the moment due to COVID, but they are running online support meetings. We also have a helpline and an online forum where anyone can ask questions and seek the support that they need. But also, as well as being a support charity, like you say, we are raising awareness, and that's amongst the general public, in the media, with politicians, governments, and employers as well, because we hear more and more often that people just aren't getting the support that they need in the workplace. And, you know, because endometriosis is such a spectrum condition and it can have such a varied impact on different people's lives, support in the workplace is so important. And I think, you know, going back to what we said earlier as well around the taboos, it's also very much a taboo in the workplace, which means people aren't having those conversations with their employer. Employers don't necessarily know how to actually support their employees. So in terms of resources, we've recently launched a endometriosis friendly employer scheme, which is actually all about working with employers so they can understand what really simple steps they can actually take to support people. So we've got various resources on our website for both employers and employees in terms of getting support at work. We've also got a number of resources, support resources. So we've got a huge information hub on our website, including one specifically on COVID as well, and how to kind of cope through COVID. So yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of what we do.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Brilliant. And the whole idea behind this podcast is that we're supporting colleagues working in HE to support each other. So it's really important that, you know, managers and line managers know about this condition. So we'll put lots of links in our reading list to all the information that you've just mentioned, so people can follow this up in their own time.
Help us fully understand what our co-workers and students who suffer from endometriosis are facing. Can you explain to us the consequences for women in society in terms of mental health and physical health from the lack of understanding concerning the condition?
Yeah, of course. So endometriosis can have a huge impact on people's mental and their physical health. And unfortunately, I think people's mental health is often forgotten when it comes to physical health conditions generally. So we know from research that if you suffer from chronic pain, which is obviously one of the main symptoms of endometriosis, it actually doubles your risk of suffering from a mental health condition. And our recent research through the All Party Parliamentary Group on Endometriosis, which is a group of MPs in Parliament, found that nearly all of those who responded said that endometriosis has meant that they haven't been able to live the life that they've wanted to, and it has had a massive impact on their mental health. And so there really does need to be improved pathways within the NHS so that people with the condition are getting access to the physical and the mental health support that they need. One of the other huge challenges is around the diagnosis itself. So it takes on average 8 years to diagnose endometriosis, which when you think about it is absolutely shocking. That's 8 years of people not knowing what they're suffering from, not having the answers that they need. And even in some cases, you know, they're being told that this is in their head, that they're making it up, that they're a wuss, they're a drama queen. Like you were saying, Faye, earlier, that's how you felt yourself. And so there's so much work to do to educate healthcare practitioners and GPs about the symptoms of endometriosis, because the long-term impact of lengthy diagnosis on people's physical and mental health really can be quite detrimental to people's overall well-being and people's overall ability to live the life that they want to live. And when endometriosis is diagnosed quickly, when you are referred through the right pathways, it can be managed. There's no cure for the condition, so it's not curable, but it can be managed. And we hear from women all the time who have gone through this pathway the right way and are getting the support that they need. But those stories shouldn't be uncommon. Those stories should be the ones that we hear of every day, and unfortunately we don't.
I suppose as well it's the support afterwards as well, because I remember when I was 18 when I got diagnosed, so I was very fortunate, and I appreciate that every day when I hear different stories of different women. Like, it makes me realise how lucky I was. But as well, it's the support after getting a diagnosis, because obviously a lot of people where like the average diagnosis time is 8 years. But I remember from mine, my doctor came in, showed me pictures of my endometriosis when I was still coming out of my anaesthetic, so I couldn't really remember what he said anyway. But there was no support offered afterwards. There wasn't even much information around what the condition is. It was kind of, you have it, we've removed it, you should be okay now. And that was pretty much it. So obviously, I think it is, Faye, you might be able to correct me, 1 in 3 women have endometriosis come back. Now, I have to go for a second op later on in the year, hopefully COVID pending. But when you're told, like, you should be okay now, like, you've got your diagnosis, we've removed it, and then you do start getting them twinges again and that pain again, it makes you go crazy, because you think, is this just like stress from last time just creeping up at me, imagining it, or is this actually coming back even though I was told you'll be okay now, you've had that removal? So it's that support after as well, which I think needs to carry on.
Definitely. And I think that is one of the real big myths about endometriosis, that it can be cured through surgery. And yes, surgery is one of the treatment options, and it can help ease the symptoms, and obviously it can remove the endometriosis which is found during the surgery, but it can grow back. And I think that's one thing people, patients themselves don't realize, but also people like employers. And I've heard of women that have gone to their employer, they've needed to take time off because of surgery, and then all of a sudden the employer will think, oh, they're cured, that's that, then we can move on now. Whereas actually endometriosis is a long-term chronic condition, and yes, surgery can help some people, but unfortunately it can grow back.
Yeah, and that leads into the next question. So what are the consequences for women suffering with endometriosis in terms of progressing with their career?
I think there are a lot of challenges for people in the workplace when the support is not there. I think, if you have the right support in the workplace, you can thrive. You can have a career, you can work around it. And I think that's a really important thing here, is if you are diagnosed with endometriosis, you can still have the career that you want. It's just that you may need a bit of extra support and guidance from your employer. So one of the things we've actually learned through COVID, employers have learned through COVID finally, is that flexibility can work for both parties. Flexibility can work for the employee and it can work for the employer, because it improves productivity. And I think, if you can have that open conversation with your employer about some of the things that, the kind of stuff that you need to help support you in the workplace, then it's best for both parties, and you can thrive. Unfortunately though, we know that that's not always the case, and some employers just aren't supporting people with endometriosis the way that they should be. So unfortunately we do hear of people losing their jobs, people having to change careers, support just not being there. So for example, in retail specifically, I think it can be a lot easier in office-based roles. But, if you work in retail or for the NHS, for example, stuff like flexibility can't always be afforded. And so, that's why it's even more important, in those spaces, to have these conversations and work to a solution that works for both parties.
So if we reflect on how long it takes, I mean, reading that report to Parliament that you've highlighted, Faye, and we'll again put that on the reading list, 8 years for a diagnosis on average, that is a long time, isn't it? So with receiving a diagnosis often being such a long process, can you provide any advice for women who may not have had an official diagnosis yet in terms of raising their condition with their employer for workplace adjustments?
Yeah, and I think that is one of the biggest challenges, that because it takes so long to diagnose, how do you tell an employer that you're having all these symptoms but you don't have a named condition to kind of give to it? And so I think, it's just being open with your employer and saying, yes, this is the condition that I think it is. This is the treatment that I'm going through. This is the process, and just coming to a workable agreement really about what works for both. People can also get a letter from their doctor. So if they are suffering and need flexible working or any adjustments to the workplace, anyone can go to their GP and say, these are the challenges that I'm facing at work, and these are the provisions that I need you to support. So that's a really practical thing that people can do if, going to your employer and having that conversation isn't working, to get actual support from the GP as well. Occupational health can also be sometimes quite helpful. So if it's, worth going to a third party and getting someone else's support, occupational health is always there as well. I will say that more awareness is needed amongst everyone in society, but also within occupational health, so that those working in that environment know about endometriosis, know that how long it takes to get diagnosed, know that process. So if you are bringing occupational health, they already have that kind of pre-existing understanding.
Brilliant. And just in terms of the signs and symptoms, you've talked about kind of long-term chronic pain, and Faye's also talked about her own personal experience. Is that what we're talking about in terms of most people's symptoms around endometriosis? Is it just that long-term chronic pain that people suffer from?
So it's a real spectrum condition, so it actually impacts everybody quite differently. But the common symptoms to look out for are chronic pelvic pain, painful sex, bowel and bladder related issues, so pain when urinating, pain when pooing, and infertility as well. A lot of people don't actually get diagnosed until they're going through the fertility process. So they're the most common ones, but it's important to remember that you don't have to suffer from all of these for it to be endometriosis. You may actually only have one or two symptoms. But if pain is interfering with your everyday life, if your period, your menstrual cycle is interfering with your life, go to the GP and get help.
As a charity, have you seen COVID impact women who suffer from endometriosis?
COVID's had a huge impact, unfortunately, on people with endometriosis. So the majority of surgeries have been cancelled. So the majority of gynecology and elective surgeries have been cancelled or postponed because of the pandemic. So people are now on a much longer waiting list, and obviously the impacts that's having on their mental and their physical health can be huge. So yeah, cancelled appointments, cancelled surgeries. Also, we're hearing some people are having issues having access to their usual treatments. So for instance, some with endometriosis will go through the induced menopause, which is normally through an injection. And we're hearing of some people that are having problems kind of accessing that through their GP. So people are really having to navigate their condition in a very different way to what they have been, like so many are having to navigate COVID and the impact it's having. But for those with chronic health conditions like endometriosis, the impact has been absolutely huge.
Do you have any tips on how women can manage their endometriosis when help may be limited due to COVID?
Yeah, so I think it's different from person to person, and one thing that GPs are still doing and specialists are still doing is online consultations. So it's always worth discussing your options directly with your GP. But on the Endometriosis UK website, we do have a COVID hub. So we've got a number of resources that have all been made by healthcare practitioners with how to help ease your symptoms during this time, how to look after your mental health. So there are some pelvic physio exercises that you can do that might help ease your symptoms as well. So definitely do have a look at that hub and read the resources and see what might help you. But I think the most important thing is to keep that dialogue going if you can with your GP or specialist.
So there are many myths around endometriosis. Please could you highlight some of them and explain why it is important to tackle these?
Yeah, of course. So unfortunately, there are so many myths when it comes to endometriosis. One of the issues is that there just isn't enough research. So we don't know what causes it. There is no cure, and treatment options are so limited. And I think that does lead to a number of myths because of that, because the awareness existingly isn't there. So one of the myths that I mentioned earlier is around the fact there's no cure for this condition, and myths around, what is a cure. So we hear all too often people, including really young women, so women aged, 17 to 19, who get told to just go and get pregnant. Just go and get pregnant and it will cure your endometriosis. And that's almost like a double insult for people with endometriosis, because on the one hand, endometriosis can impact your fertility. You might not necessarily know if you can have children in the future, and so saying to just go and get pregnant, so candidly, is just so insulting and can have such an impact on people. And also, it's not a cure. It's there is no cure for this condition, so that's a real bugbear within our charity, and something we're really trying to change in that sense. Also, I think one of the biggest ones is that this is just a bad period. Endometriosis is just a bad period. It's just women's problems. Just get on with it. Don't worry, this isn't serious. Go away, go on the pill or whatever and deal with it. And again, this is not just a bad period. This can have an impact on all aspects of people's lives. And I think, in a lot of ways, endometriosis is very understated. It's very underrepresented, and it's very misunderstood in that sense. And, I think even when you explain what endometriosis is in terms of, the actual scientific definition, I don't think it does justice to the huge impact that it can have.
I'm guessing people feel incredibly lonely. I mean, goodness, as a 17-year-old, if I was just told, oh, it's a bad period, or even worse, just go and get pregnant, I think I would have felt so isolated. If you don't have, a parent that you can talk to or friends that you can talk to, I guess people that you support through your charity often talk about loneliness, do they, in terms of not knowing who to talk to and what to believe?
Yeah, definitely. And just that feeling of isolation, and the fact that it can be such a taboo. I think again that just adds to the isolation that people are feeling.
Yeah,
I think as well, I've heard previously that endometriosis only affects, say, like career women who haven't basically had a baby. So by the time they're like 30, if they haven't had a child till then, say that's because they are progressing in their career, it will affect them because they haven't had a baby yet. And it's sad. And I think as well, in regards to that comment, get pregnant and it'll cure endometriosis, that's such a pressure to put on young people. Say for instance, just 17, 18, you get told that you might not financially be in a position to have a child, and say that is the case and you do that, you could be putting financial pressure on, say, family to help you out. It's not just the individual, it's the effect on others around them because of these, which sometimes can be quite vicious myths that can turn someone's life upside down. And there's ones I've heard, getting a hysterectomy will cure endometriosis, which correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's factually correct. And there's lots, and they definitely need addressing. I think as soon as they're addressed, the culture change will happen around endometriosis.
Definitely. And the hysterectomy point is so important, because hysterectomy, like you say, Faye, is not a cure for this condition. And even women that we know who have had a hysterectomy, their endometriosis can still impact them, and this can be something that impacts you for life. And like telling young people in particular to go and just have a hysterectomy, so blasé, A, it's not a cure, and B, this shouldn't be something that young people are having to face. Shouldn't be. I mean, nobody should be having to face that as the outcome, if that's not the outcome that they want. So yeah, that's so important. And I think just on the fertility point as well, a lot of people with endometriosis often feel that fertility is almost used as a weapon against them getting the support that they need, because on the one hand, some people with endometriosis absolutely will want to have a family, and that's so incredibly important that they get the support that they need. But there's also almost a myth within society and healthcare that everybody wants children. It's just almost like a thing that's embedded, like every woman will want a child, and that's that. Whereas the reality is not everybody does. And I hear stories from people saying they feel that they're not being taken seriously because they've said they don't want children, and it's not until they say, oh, maybe I will have children, that then they're being taken seriously and they're being told about the treatment that's available. So yeah, fertility is such a double-edged sword, if you like, in terms of getting support.
I think it's that as well. It comes down to choice. So I think whether, if I was faced with that situation, I'm 24 next month, but currently 23. I don't know whether I want children or not. And if I was faced with that decision, I wouldn't know. But if you were to have a hysterectomy, I don't think it's always about whether you want them or not. It's massive around, it's having that choice taken away. You can't choose whether, yes, I'm going to have a baby, or no, I'm happy with my life the way it is, I'm content, I'm successful. You don't have to have a child to be successful, but it's that choice being taken away, that yes or no. I think that's huge as well.
Definitely. And I think patient choice in this whole discussion is so important, and that as a patient you can advocate for yourself, you can say no. And I think there can be such a power struggle almost when you go to a doctor, because you trust what the doctor is saying to you, and when you're young, when you don't necessarily have the information to hand, you do just kind of take what the doctor says as gospel, if you like, and you do just follow it. Whereas actually with endometriosis, it should be a two-way conversation, and you should feel like you can say to the doctor, actually, I don't want to do this treatment. Actually, this isn't for me. This isn't going to fit in with my life plan. This isn't for me. And then you should be able to have a two-way conversation about what steps you want to take. So patient choice is so important.
And I often wonder as well, because I've been asked that personally from numerous doctors when I've gone in with symptoms, and the first thing that I've been asked is, do you want children? And I often wonder, why are you asking that? Will there be a change in like the priority of me getting treatments? Maybe, I'm not saying that is the case, but I often wonder why that question does have to be asked.
Thank you both. Thank you, Faye from Endometriosis UK, for sharing so much important information with us, and certainly educating me. So thank you. And I know our listeners will just find that really, really interesting. And thank you to Faye from the Academy as well for your honesty and openness about how the conditions impacted on your life. We've got some more endometriosis related podcasts coming, so I'm interested about learning more and hearing more people's perspectives. But before we close, Faye from Endometriosis UK. We always finish each podcast with the same question, and I'd be really interested to hear your point of view on this. So we love to hear just 3 or 4 kind of take-home tips from you for our listeners to help them to reflect on their own personal practice. So if you could give us a few tips just to go away and think about in relation to this really important topic, what would they be?
I think from a patient perspective, so if you think that you might have endometriosis or you're going through that process, I think the most important thing to remember is you're not alone in this. This is 1.5 million women, and those assigned female at birth, and support is available, through our helpline, our support services, and so on. So don't suffer in silence. Also advocate for yourself, always try when you can to have the confidence to say to your employer or, your GP, whoever it is that you're talking to, have the confidence to know that you know your own body, you know what's right for you, you know what you're experiencing might not be normal. So just advocate for yourself and empower yourself with information and knowledge for when you are getting that help. I think my biggest tip for those that don't have endometriosis is just don't dismiss people. Don't allow society to kind of give you this vision of what you think endometriosis is. Do your research and try and understand the huge impact that this can have. And again, I think knowledge is key. Just do your research, educate yourself, talk to other people about endometriosis as well. Whether you've listened to this podcast or you've done some more research, say that today you learnt about endometriosis. Do you know what that is? And have that conversation, start that conversation off, because it's through conversation that more people will understand that what they're experiencing might not be normal. And my final one is, if you are an employer, is to have a conversation at work about this, to open up the conversation, allow yourself to be open and honest. If you don't know anything about endometriosis, that's fine, but try and learn, try and understand, and do everything you can to support those with this condition.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Faye, for your time. It's been great chatting to you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Well, I really enjoyed that chat with Faye and hearing about the work she's engaged with to support women with this condition. It seems endometriosis is such a spectrum condition which affects colleagues in so many different ways. And it seems that it's really important that we're aware of this so that we can support other colleagues working in HE. So I know for myself, I'm going to think about how this condition affects so many people in the different ways and what I can do to support people.
Yeah, Alex, I would agree. I think Faye has been really helpful in terms of informing both ourselves and our listeners about the condition. I was particularly shocked when I heard endometriosis is not just a gynecological problem, but it can affect other areas of the body too. I think Faye said up to 10% of people who have endometriosis also suffer from thoracic endometriosis, so it could be affecting colleagues in more ways than we originally were aware of.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely. Well, if you'd like to take your thinking further, we've added some resources to the website on our specific podcast reading list, which you can access at liverpool.ac.uk/the-academy/podcast. So do check those out. Also, let us know what you thought about the episode. You can tweet us at Live Academy, and you can also find the usual podcast hosts at eLearnerMatt or at Alexandra_Owen on Twitter.
If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in the podcast and would be interested in joining an endometriosis support group, please email us at equality@live.ac.uk.
Brilliant. And we're also really grateful for those of you who've taken the time to either rate or review our show in your podcast provider's app. It really does help others find us. Or alternatively, we'd really appreciate it if you could recommend the podcast to your colleagues. Bye for now.